The sun is shining down brightly upon a great outdoor square in Athens. The place is Agora, the meeting place of men. On two sides of the square rise beautiful buildings and temples of white marble. On the other two sides are covered porches where people may stand and walk sheltered from the sun or from the rain and cold winds. The open square is full of people. A lot of them are busily buying and selling at the booths and stalls in one part of Agora. In the other part, many men are walking here and there and talking. Their voices rise and fall, and their movements and gestures are always toward each other. Their white robes gleam like the marble columns of the buildings. As each man speaks, another listens. Then he in turn speaks, and so many talk and listen. Altogether the sound is like a great river clashing the rocks together in its course. The Agora is the most important place in Athens because there the spirit that dwelt in each man could speak to other men, each one enjoying what he heard and having something to say in return. Every morning the Agora was full of people, mostly men who wanted to hear the news of the day, to discuss the affairs of state, to put questions, to give answers. And in the market the countrymen and merchants sold their produce to the slaves of different households. One noon the men in the Agora were dispersing to go out to the gymnasia to watch the young men practice their skills for the Olympian Games. A little boy, with his pedagogue, was on his way to Palestra for instruction in wrestling, discus throwing, jumping, and running. Through the Agora wound a procession of men and women. It was unusual to see women in the Agora. A musician played his lyre, the onlookers talked, and little Themistocles listened. They said this was a company of Greeks who were sailing that day across the Aegean Sea to Ionia, there to settle in new homes. The oracle at Delphi had promised them success in finding good land for corn, grapes, olives, and water. Their slaves were laden with jars, bundles, furnishings, bowls of fruit and grain. The procession moved toward the town hall, where the leaders of the expedition would be given a brazier of coals from the sacred fire of Athens, with which to light the fires in their new homes. Many such companies had sailed east toward the mainland of Asia. Greek cities had grown up where people had set up self-governing states, independent of their mother city. But these people looked back at their homeland with affection. Wherever they went, they were still Greeks, speaking Greek and worshiping the Greek gods. It was nothing new to see such colonists set forth, but Themistocles was filled with wonder. The East! He was old enough to attend to the talk of grown-ups and wonder at it. From what they said, the East was full of light and wisdom. Many persons from Greece went to the East to learn the wisdom of old. The light of the rising sun, gold and yellow in the sky, coloring the East, seemed to Themistocles to be the very light which men went to find. While to the west, where the blue sea stretched, all was unknown though some spoke of a lost world sunk below the waters when the gods sent a flood to purify the earth. From the grown-ups, Themistocles had heard that in the north was a land of frost and ice beyond which the Hyperboreans, a race of beings who lived in perfect happiness. To reach them through the white snows was not possible, so great were the dangers. Whiteness to the north, blue to the west, yellow to the east. And when Themistocles imagined a color to the south, where the great warmth of the sun flooded the earth, it was red. But it was the east that lured him. Maybe he would go there when he became a man. Little did he think that when he was a man, the East would come to him. What kind of life did Themistocles have as a boy, and what kind of a boy was he? His parents were humble people. His home was on a quiet dirt street in Athens, between the windowless walls of the houses. Only the locked doors of the houses faced the street, and behind them sat the slaves whose duty it was to open the doors to guests. Inside the house of an Athenian there was a courtyard surrounded by the rooms of the house. The sacred fire was always kept burning in the dining hall, but there were no stoves, only pots of coal to warm the rooms in winter. The people slept on beds without springs or sheets. Athenians did not think of things as important. They had no clocks, no compasses, no buttons, no stockings. They studied poetry without books, geography without maps, politics without newspaper. All private houses were alike, whether of the rich or the poor. The wealth was spent on beautiful public buildings, which all could enjoy. In the homes, the rooms were small and dark, except for light from the courtyard. Themistocles' mother stayed at home most of the time, overseeing slaves who did the housework. She told Themistocles the stories of gods and heroes, and of the battle of Troy. His father's occupation is not known, but all Athenians had some work in connection with the government of the city, work like being responsible for a fleet, or being a juryman, or directing a chorus, or building and sculpturing. Themistocles had a spirit for doing things, certain kinds of things. He wasn't interested in being a good-mannered or graceful, and didn't learn to play the lyre. In Athens, the mark of an uneducated man was one who does not know how to play the lyre. When Themistocles was called uneducated, he replied, "Although I don't play the lyre, yet I will bring greatness and glory to my city." When he had holidays from school, he did not spend them in play, but inventing great orations about his city. As he was growing up, he paid more and more attention to what was being discussed in the agora, and to the news that was passed from man to man about the whole Greek world, by now spread out in many colonies all around the Mediterranean Sea. He heard of the greatest city in Ionia, Miletus, and of a wise Greek named Thales, who lived in Miletus. Thales, who had learned from the Babylonians the science of the stars, had himself added new knowledge from his own studies of the laws of movement of the heavenly bodies. Out of this knowledge, he claimed that the moon sometimes comes between the sun and the earth and shadows the sun. He predicted an eclipse that when the day would be dark from this shadow. Some words of Thales, which might have reached Themistocles' ears, and which he might have pondered, were, "God is the most ancient of all things, for he has no birth. The world is the most beautiful of all things, for it is the work of God. Time is the wisest of all things, for it finds out everything." And we will find out more about Themistocles next time, and what greatness he brought to the Greeks.